Hello everyone! Today I am going to show you how to counter every hero in Overwatch. Specifically, at least one hero for each role that can counter them and why, which can also be applied to other heroes. This guide is focused for newer players, but it will also help a ton for returning players that may need some help understanding how perks and some reworks we got over the years may affect the matchup. Ana has no mobility and relies on her cooldown to survive. The best heroes to counter her are D.Va, Zarya, Tracer and Kiriko. Most dive tanks are decent against her, but D.Va specifically can shut down both sleep and nade, while she can also hit her shots while trying to heal their team. With Ana's nade perk, being one of the best in the game, it makes it pretty necessary for it to be shut down before engaging on her. Same applies to Zarya, and in the case of DPS, Tracer's mobility makes her harder to get hit by either of Ana's abilities. For Kiriko, she's able to both cleanse the sleep and the nade. As a small tip, don't use it for the sleep unless that person would die or you see the nade being thrown, since that means you no longer have Suzu for nade. Lifeweaver is also kind of a counter now, due to his pool being able to cleanse with one of his minor perks. Ashe is a medium to long range hitstun, but she does have some self-peel and mobility due to her shotgun, and on scope primary being decent up close. Most dive tanks, being D.Va, Winton, Ball and Hazard, will easily force her out of position, and both Winton and D.Va can counter her shotgun to different degrees, while Hazard can actually wall behind Ashe, making her escape a lot worse. For DPS, Widow is her hardest counter, being playing better than her at long range. Live DPS can also work, but they aren't as effective for the reasons mentioned before. For support, Lucio is able to dive her and speed his team to push her, or Kiriko, who can contest her at range since she slows down while scoping, making her easier to hit, and she can also cleanse dynamite. Bop is a medium range hero with really strong survivability, which is restricted to long cooldowns. He also has no horizontal mobility except he chooses his perk, which grants him a short cooldown horizontal dash. The best tank against him is easily Winton. He's able to destroy Lamp while hitting the enemies inside. Yes, this perk makes it so Lamp will heal anyone close when destroyed, but Winton still can easily follow up. His bubble also blocks buff healing for anyone you jump in. For DPS, long range DPS like Ashe or Hanzo will pressure him at range safely, where his damage isn't as effective, forcing his cooldowns. At the same time, Sombra is able to EMP his ult and Lamp, shutting down his strong tools. For support there isn't any specific interaction, but Ana is able to pressure Lamp very easily, cause his regenerative burst doesn't work on nated allies. Bastion is a high damage dealing DPS that can be tricky to deal with. As a base form, for tanks, Sigma, D.Va and Orisa have strong cooldowns that can mitigate his turret form and soak damage for the team while still pressuring him with some poke damage. For DPS, it will be long range heroes with good DPS that can simply poke him out and aren't threatened like Ashe or Hanzo, and for support, Ana and Zen can easily nade or discard him while in turret form, forcing him out as he repositions seeing his slowdown in that form. Now, everything changes due to his major perk choice. With self-repair, most doesn't change, only making him even better against low damage heroes like Sombra, Tracer and Winton, while the in-home explosive essentially flips his matchups, making them more favorable against ranged threats. If he chooses his perk, any dive tank, especially Winton and again D.Va, can easily counter him as he loses a ton of DPS up close. Brig is the quintessential anti-dive support, but that makes you incredibly weak against long-range burst projectile heroes like pharah, junkrat and kiriko. For tanks, the only one worth mentioning are mauga and orisa. Both have good range and can ignore her boobs, which is how she deals with most tanks. For support, anything with range like illari or Ana can easily pressure her, and even if she gets close, they both have great answers for it. Cassidy is a close to mid-range hit scan. For tanks, any tank that excels at close range and can close the gap safely will do, with D.Va, Orisa and mauga being able to get on top of him, ignoring his hinder nade. At the same time, any shield tank can pressure him at range. For DPS, Widow beats him at long range, meaning he can't poke safely and he doesn't have the mobility to get close to her. For support, there isn't anything worth mentioning, as every support has something that can annoy him, but not downright counter him completely. D.Va is a dive tank with decent both burst and sustain damage and mitigation. Unfortunately for her, perks do absolutely nothing for her worst matchups, those being Zarya, Symmetra and Brig for each role. Zarya and Sim have beams, which can't be eaten by Matrix, while Brig can easily counter her engages and burst damage, while she can't eat any of Brig's form of healing or damage, making her a lot more vulnerable. Doom is a dive tank, but unlike D.Va, he has worse mitigation but high burst damage. For tanks, Hog and Orisa can easily shut down his only defensive tool and even cut his engages with Orisa Fortify as an extra layer that annoys Doom. For DPS, any high mobility DPS like Tracer can avoid his punch easily, which also reduces his tankiness. For support, Ana and Zen as a combo make it impossible for him to play, with brig being another generally good answer. With that being said, power matrix will make his blockade suck for a second, meaning you need to be careful when you nade or slip him. Echo is a very versatile DPS, being able to play like both a poke or assassin DPS, which makes her counter list a lot harder to make. Generally speaking, any hit scan is able to hit her easily in the sky where she's vulnerable. For tanks, Winton is pretty effective at blocking her abilities while forcing her out of position. D.Va is also good at pressuring her and able to eat most of her damage, but can get blown out by her beam. For support, Illari has decent hit scan damage, but her abilities don't get shut down by hers easily. Genji is a flanker DPS with some poke. His counters are defined by how they deal with his deflect, which makes beam characters like Winton, Zarya, Sim, Mei, and Moira very strong against him. Brig is also a good counter, as again she counters most dive heroes easily. Hanzo is a mid-range projectile hero, and he gets countered by most dive heroes like D.Va, Winton, Genji, Tracer, etc. As a support, mauga heroes that can speed up your team, like Juno and Lucio, will do. Shield tanks can also help poke DPS play safely, but it isn't as effective since Hanzo does have some decent shield breaking. Hazard is a dive roll tank that is very versatile and doesn't have any major weakness. He still has some favorable matchups against most anti-dive heroes like Orisa, who can also get out of his ult, Brig and Torb, who isn't that afraid against an all-in from him and can easily poke him out of position, and he can also suffer a bit against the Zen plus Ana combo and Mauga. Illari is a poke support with great single target healing and self-peel but low utility. Generally speaking, the best way to counter Illari is to destroy her pylon, which is her strongest ability, meaning dive heroes are pretty decent. They can still die by her hands, or she can escape with her shield, which all gets even stronger with sombra. The only hero that is a must against her is D.Va, cause she can also eat her ultimate with ease. It's also very effective to one-shot her with Hanzo or Widow, who aren't really threatened by her poke at long range. For supports, Ana nades shut her healing, leaving her with no option to save allies, and Kiriko, who can cleanse her ult and even force her out of position by shooting at her. Jungle Queen is a broad tank with great sustain, damage and utility, but she has very poor mobility. For tanks, Zarya is her worst nightmare, being able to cleanse her wounds with her bubble, which not only makes her damage worse but causes her self-healing, and it also counters her ult. For DPS, most long-range hitscan and flying heroes will have no problem with her, not only due to her limited mobility, but because she has almost no way to protect her allies, leaving them vulnerable to poke. For supports, again, Ana and Kiriko are great picks. Ana cuts her self-healing, which makes her easy to kill, and Kiriko can clear her wounds and ult. Also worth mentioning are Brig and Lucio, who can boop her when she's trying to engage, being able to even cancel her axe swing due to its limited range. Junkrat is a hero that, similarly to Echo, can be played as a poke or assassin hero, but most people in all ranks go to the poke playstyle. As a whole, flying heroes like Echo, pharah and Juno are really good against him since they're very hard to hit for him, even with frag cannon. For tanks, D.Va is the most reliable answer, though Orisa and Zarya are worth mentioning. D.Va can simply eat all of his damage, Orisa can do so to a lesser extent, while rushing him at range and not being able to be CC'd by either the C4 or the trap, and Zarya simply feeds off his bombs, which are easy to block with bubbles. Juno is a very mobile support, but with no in-combat sustain. She is easy to be killed by both hitscan and dive heroes, but she can play more as a healbot effectively, so dive heroes that can hunt her down in the backline will always be effective. Kiriko doesn't do terrible against any hero, but she loses a good amount of value if there is nothing to be cleansed, or against sustain damage. So heroes like Winton, Hazard, Pharah, Genji, Juno, Moira, etc. are all quite effective. Again, none are hard counters, but are still your best option. Lifeweaver is a highly defensive support that can still deal decent damage, especially up close. Due to perks, he isn't that weak to getting low or poked, but he can still get one-shot easily by Widow due to his hitbox, and his weapon isn't amazing against flying heroes. He tends to be a weak character overall, but in matchups aren't that sharp. Lucio is a highly mobile support that, unlike Juno, tends to play at close range, which means anti-flanking DPS like Sim and Torb are really good against him. For tanks, Winton can match his mobility and ignore his boop if you space and time his bubble correctly. Brig can also be good against aggressive Lucios, pooping them out of position. Mauga is a very volatile tank that depends a lot on constantly shooting his enemy for sustain. His harder counter is Sigma, being able to deny his damage easily at all ranges. Similarly, D.Va can matrix his gun, denying his self-sustain. For DPS, mobile ones like Tracer and Sombra will be hard to hit, which means he has less options to gain health with. For support, Ana Zen can easily counter him completely. Sleep plus nade after a charge means he dies, and this extra damage is simply too much for him to take, since he has no way to ignore damage completely for the long durations. You only need to be careful of his charge, which can one-shot you, quote unquote. Mei is a short-range tanky DPS with really good crowd control, though she still has some range options. Her hardest tank counters are Orisa and Zarya, who can ignore her CC and kill her at close range. For DPS, she's quite bad against flying heroes, and for support, Kiriko can clear her CC and isn't poking her down, while Lucio and Brig can help their team by moving her out of range. Mercy is a pocket support. She will generally be poking an enemy DPS, and her mobility is very telegraphed, making her very weak against long range hitscan heroes, so Soldier, Cassidy, Ashe, Illari, etc. For tanks, any that can pressure whoever she's pocketing, but Mauga is also able to hit her rather consistently due to his range. Moira is a short range, high damage and healing support with no utility aside from healing. D.Va can completely shut down her orbs and burst her to force fade, while Hook has the same range as her primary fire and gets one shot after, making him a very reliable counter. For DPS, high damage hits can outrange her, limiting her damage and self-healing, while supports, like Ana, completely cuts her healing to any ally, and if Moira uses her fade, an nade usually means she's dead. Orisa is a very scary tank as she can deal damage both up close and in range, and her matchups are similarly to Bastion decided by her perks. Base Orisa gets hard countered by beams, so Zarya, Winton and Sim are her worst matchups. She is also not great at dealing with Zen Discord, but now, with Protective Barrier and Fleeting Bulwark, suddenly she's really good against Zarya and Zen, while still being bad against Sim and Winton and becoming a bit worse in general against dive heroes since she loses the little mobility she had to catch up some of them. Pharah is a flying hero who has more clear counters than Echo but can still be played onto most comps. D.Va, Mauga, Cassidy, Ashe and illari can pressure her, and Mercy, who is usually poking her, with great effect. D.Va is especially good since she cuts him in her ult. Ram is another very versatile hero, having good poke, pro potential and ally peel which makes him playable into most comps. Rein is usually a good option since his shields shut down his poke and he easily outbrawls him. Bastion can take his poke and doesn't let him do much in melee form, while Zen has a similar effect with Discord. Now, flying heroes are also a good option, but with Vengeful Vortex, one of his major perks, he turns those into favorable matchups since he completely shuts down their mobility quite reliably. Reaper is a close range DPS that is currently more effective as a more in and out hero due to his rather recent TP buffs. For tanks, the obvious choice is D.Va, who can completely deny any form of damage he may want to deal, which also casts his self-healing. At the same time, he can catch up to him if he tries to escape. For DPS and support, any mobile hero with some form of CC will do. Junkrat, Ashe, Lucio and Brig can easily get him out of effective range or escape him at the same time. Rein is a rolled melee tank. His main weakness is basically any form of CC. Orisa can stop his charge in many ways and keep him away. Pharah can not only boop him but pressure him or his team from different angles, making his shield much worse. Junkrat can boop him around, and the same applies to Lucio, who can also speed his team for escape. Some other heroes like Tracer, Reaper and Brig can annoy him but not counter him fully. Hog is a big fat sack of meat with a hook. There isn't much else to it. If a hero can counter his hook or abuse his huge hitbox and relies on self-healing, it counters him. Mauga simply burns him down fast and hooking him isn't effective most of the time. Orisa has multiple ways to counter his hook, same for Zarya. For DPS, any poke DPS that will play far from his range works wonders against him, especially since he provides no utility for his team. For supports, Ana's nade is a huge counter. A good Kiriko can cleanse someone getting hooked, and Zen can play inside his effective range and destroy him with Discord. Sigma is another incredibly versatile hero with very few counters. For tanks, Winton is the only one that can be mentioned, ignoring his two forms of defense and being able to shield his rock. For DPS, Sim is his main counter since she easily abuses his shield and he can't suck her charge beam. For support, the only two worth mentioning are Lucio and Juno, who can speed with their team to abuse Sigma close, where he's much weaker, but there isn't really a definitive counter. Sojourn is a DPS that has it all. Decent damage at all ranges, mobility and zone control. Fortunately, she does have a few weaknesses. First, D.Va and most shield tanks from Rein and Sigma will negate her railgun charge for the most part, which is the strongest part of her kit, and even if she does, blocking it is still a good solution since she will need to charge it again. For DPS, Indian Tracer can match her mobility and win the duel as long as she doesn't have a ring on charge, which you can tell if she's shining or not. For support again, nothing in particular but Lucio and Juno are quite mobile and enable the team to be able to rush her down. Soldier is a well-rounded hitscan DPS, which means he doesn't hard lose any matchup, but still has some heroes that can give him trouble. For tanks, D.Va eats all of his damage while she has the mobility needed to force him out of positions. The same applies to Ball and Winton to a lesser extent. For DPS, any hitscan with better burst damage, those being Ashe and Widow, will be more consistently in the 1v1 at most ranges. For support, Ana gains in trouble at dueling since she can self-healing, but it isn't a deal breaker for him. Sombra is a flanker DPS that excels at picking solitary targets and disrupting certain abilities with her hack. Winton can easily cancel hack with his bubble and jump on her, forcing her out. He can do the same if an ally is getting hacked, and even if they did, his bubble block her virus and can still force her out. With her rather low DPS, there isn't much else she can do about it. The same logic applies to D.Va, but she actually has to shoot her to cancel it, which isn't hard since her primary fire hitbox is quite big. For DPS, any anti-flanker hero like Torb or Sim doesn't let her flank without getting detected, and both turrets will usually be a pain if she wants to hack. Our DPS don't lose much, even when hacked like Hanzo can also be effective. For support, Brig is the answer. Basically everything I said about Winston applies to Brig. Sim is a high utility DPS that can play both defensively and offensively, which applies to every one of her abilities. That being said, she struggles offensively against flying heroes. Echo and Pharah are basically impossible to kill as long as they have some healing. With Junkrat and Ashe being another notable counters, they can force her out to use her TP offensively and boop her out of it and destroy it fast when she does. For support, she isn't effective at killing Mercy or Juno due to their mobility. For tanks, there really isn't a single tank she can do something about. For dive tanks, her turrets are decent at countering angles and they can't do much about her beam, while most poke tanks can't do much once she gets in with her TP. Broad tanks are the best option, so Jungle Queen, Hog and Rein, but she can still poke them at range and use her TT with her team. Torb is a DPS that excels on controlling space close to him, while still being decent at poking. For tanks, D.Va can eat both his damage, his turrets and his ult, while forcing out of overload easily. For DPS, any high range DPS like Widow, Ashe, Pharah and Echo will be quite effective at taking him down. For support, Sun and Illari tend to play at long range where they are safe for most of his kit. Overwatch's most popular hero is a highly mobile DPS with very low HP. For tanks, there isn't any that completely shuts her down, but Winston tends to be able to reliably damage her if she gets close to you or any ally she's trying to kill. For DPS, any anti-flanking DPS like Torb, Sim, and Mei won't let her play near you or your turrets. For support, Brig, which again is very strong against flanking DPS and can deal reliable damage to her up close, even being able to block her pulse bomb if you predict it. Venger is a close range DPS with very high burst potential. For tanks, any tank that is able to CC them reliably with a Pain, or Orisa and Doom especially, being able to cancel Burrow, leaving them very vulnerable. With a similar logic, Cassidy is a very strong counter since he can hinder them on reaction, leaving them with no escape. Flying heroes will also be out of their range most of the time. For supports, Brig is the best answer with the same logic on most flanking DPS, but she can even block Burrow damage since it has a loud and predictable cast. Widow is the sniper of Overwatch, being able to one-shot any hero below 300 HP. That should make it clear that her counters are tanks, especially the ones who can easily force her out of favorable positions. For DPS, heroes with vertical mobility can be decent, but they can still all die by a one-shot. For support, the same logic applies, but it's worth mentioning that Brig can at least block a bit of her shots and Lucio can hunt her down, although it takes forever to do it consistently. Winston is a dive tank with a very short range and super high mobility. For tanks, D.Va can match said mobility and beat him up close. Mauga can also force his bubble at range while destroying him up close, which he cannot do much about it. For DPS, basically anything that he can jump onto, Bastion, Torb and Reaper being good examples. Against flying heroes he also has little to do. For supports, Brig again super strong against dive, and funny enough, Ana is quite decent against him right now due to her minor perk being so incredibly broken and very easy to use against him. It will probably get nerfed soon, but it's a fun mention. Ball is also a dive tank with short range, but slightly different in his utility and tankiness. For tanks, Orisa, Hog and Doom can cancel his engages with this, since he is much worse against CC. For DPS, the same as Winston applies, being anyone he doesn't want to jump on, but he can do something against flying heroes. With that being said, Sombra is another great counter, since she also can hack him to cancel his sprite driver, but also force him out of ball form, leaving him vulnerable. For support, Brig for the 1000th time is great against dive tanks. Zarya is a broad tank with short range and low mobility, but with insane utility and the ability to win games by herself if given the chance. For tanks, the answer is easy. Winston. He essentially will never charge her up unless the player eats glue for dinner, and can force her to use it on allies while engaging, leaving her without much to do since she can match his mobility. For DPS, most long range hitscans like Cassidy, Ashe and Widow will again not really charge her accidentally, and they can't play on most positions since her mobility and range are very limited. She does have a perk that gives her some verticality, but they are still great picks against her, and it forces her out of the better minor perk. For supports, illari and Bab, similarly to the long range DPS, won't have much trouble, and Life Weaver is also worth mentioning, since pulling someone out of her range is really effective, and he also enables high ground in any space for hitscans to counter her. Zen is a damage dealing poke support with no mobility. No, I'm not going to mention his stupid perk, it sucks. For tanks, D.Va is the best option, being able to easily jump on him and eat his damage, enabling her team to kill him, or she can do herself if no one is around. Winston can work, but it's slightly more risky because he can still get killed by him in some situations. For DPS, Widow outranges him easily and doesn't let him poke. Tracer is also especially good since she can stay at the perfect range to kill him without being zero of his melee. For supports, not a direct counter, but Juno and Lucio can boost their teams to rush him and kill him, and Ana can counter his ult. That's all everyone. If you like the video, remember to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this, it helps a ton. See you next time.